increase your offer. We have offers between 1.8 and 2.5 million. And I was like, okay, if you already have a offer for 2.5 million, why are you asking me to increase mine from 1.8 to 2.5 or higher? So there is a lot of games now on this business.
Yeah, and you can speculate or debate on where the brokers are coming from. On one end of the spectrum, you intuitively say, well, brokers get commissions on the best money they can make, and they're going to drive the seller to hold on for a higher price. No doubt that's true in a lot of cases. But the better brokers want to go to market with a deal that is going to close, so they are willing to be more realistic in the market price. It's not too dissimilar from, I know you may hear us many times use the analogy of selling a residential, homestead. A lot of times people go to market, they think their house is worth $1.2 million, but the realtor says no. You'll be lucky if you get 900 for it or less even. And sometimes the sellers aren't happy to hear that, but again, the good brokers know what they can get in the market for a comparable property, and that's kind of the max they're going to go on the price. So I think a lot of that analogy applies here as far as the broker input into the deal. So the bottom line, my word of encouragement is hang with it, work as many as you can, keep them going. It may take a while. On the flip side of all of that, I also caution, don't fall in love with your deals. Just, be smart, work the numbers, do your analysis, do your due diligence, ask your questions, and make the best decision you can along the way. So hope that helped, Austin.
Appreciate it, Doug.
All right, anybody else? One last time around the horn here, and then we'll get into our topic of the day. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for sitting in. As I teased out, I wanted to take some time today to preview our ACE framework program. This is the offering that we've constructed that is more focused on your successful acquisition of a business, but it's a program that we offer to help you with the transition of actually moving in and taking over that business. If you've heard part of our story about ACE before, the overarching theme of ACE is to give you direction and guidance to consider building a true management-run company, not an owner-centric company. And that's a critical differentiator in the small business entrepreneur world. Far too often, when you think about the entrepreneur who gets a great idea and does a startup of a business, and even if the business takes root, starts growing and scales, there is often a play where the owner becomes the center of that universe. Everything circulates around and through the owner. We had a story of an acquisition a year or so ago where it was discovered the seller had a practice of making all of his techs. I can't recall if it was electrical or plumbing, but he had a tradition of all of his techs lining up to come through his office one by one and have a chat to get the day started. Well, he had over 20 people on his team, and to line them all up in the yard and go through a gauntlet like that just to get their day started, he burned a lot of daylight, a lot of time, and you can imagine his margin didn't look real great. It was still a viable business, but one of the easy first things we did, we killed that tradition and got the team busy. There were still team meetings from time to time, but it wasn't that archaic Machiavellian kind of approach to forcing everyone go one by one and pay homage to the owner's desk. Just a bizarre strategy that the guy had going on. But while that's an extreme example, it's not uncommon of that owner-centric mindset and tradition. So with ACE, we want to introduce the idea of creating a management run company. So what does that mean? How do you do that? Well, the first thing to do is to begin the work to define a leadership team within the company. Now, sometimes these businesses, depending on the size, already have some framework. There's a little bit of an org chart that does exist. As a for instance, if a business already has a pretty distinct carve out between residential and commercial, there are usually inevitably a commercial lead and a residential lead that's part of the team, even though that person may be a senior tech or maybe even a licensed tradesman that is at the top of each of those stacks. But if they're not formally designated as members of a leadership team, usually it's a straight line to the owner and they solve problems together and they don't necessarily talk to each other. There's no leveraging, there's no collaboration, there's no continuity. It's just kind of every man for themselves. And whereas if you acknowledge that structure and designate those two individuals to be on a leadership team, and then you develop a discipline of that team coming together periodically to solve problems, make plans, make decisions about the future of the business, you've got a lot more buy-in and a lot more continuity that can accrue from that. So you're able to, you as the owner, and get to perform the classic work on the business, not in the business. So let me pause there for a minute. Does that make sense to everybody? Anybody got a question about that concept? Okay. Well, I'll move on then. So how do we do that with the ACE framework? Number one, if you do choose to sign on and subscribe to our ACE program, there is a lead integrator that will be assigned to you, and that person becomes somewhat of a project manager for you to kind of guide the journey. And typically our ACE ACE engagements run basically for 6 months. We allocate roughly 30 days pre-closing where you can begin the work talking to your integrators, and you will have the benefit of kind of planning for the transition in advance, so that on the day of closing and you literally take the keys to the kingdom, you have a plan on how you want to affect that transition from the prior owner to your ownership. So your lead integrator will meet with you prior to that close date, roughly 30 days, give or take. We don't hold that hard and fast, but that's just a general target we shoot for. In addition, with ACE, you're going to be introduced to other subject matter integrators. There will be a finance integrator. There will be a people and culture integrator resource, and there will be a sales and marketing integrator resource. So this becomes a team that you can leverage for the duration of ACE to look at all facets of the business, and you can work through the successful transition. A couple of the milestones we have baked into the ACE framework is that clearly the closing date is milestone number one. That's the big one. You take ownership, you begin working with the team at your business to make these choices and decisions of direction you want to go. But ultimately, we want to shoot for somewhere in the 45 to 60 day time frame after closing. We want to hold a leadership team workshop. So that basically gives you 45 to 60 days to identify the people you think you want on that leadership team, talk with them, work them up, get them ready, get them engaged, and then your lead integrator will help facilitate this workshop. Typically, they are roughly a day and a half. Most companies choose to do it offsite somewhere, somehow. We find a lot of utility in just arranging one of the small conference rooms at one of those smaller, local hotels. And you get food, catered in, and then go through an agenda for that workshop where you can introduce and have a specific discussion with your leadership team about mission and vision and purpose for the business. You can talk about procedures. We actually introduce some process mapping strategies if you've not done that before with a team. We can take one of the actual core processes in the business and get it mapped out so that you then can have all the members of the leadership team contributing and talking together. And it always happens. I've never seen this fail when we get into the process mapping and everybody starts sharing about their part of the process. You discover that there's either some redundancies, some gaps, or some opportunity to squeeze some margin out that can give you immediate benefit on the bottom line. And again, I've never seen it fail when we do one of these process maps that we don't discover something to that benefit. But usually at the end of those sessions, we find the leadership team has a bit of an aha moment. Oh, this is real. We really have authority. We have delegated empowerment, and we can help move this business forward. And inevitably, we see a bounce kind of in the buy-in of whatever your vision and declaration of for the way forward. It just kind of gets crystallized in a very good way. And then we proceed for another 45 to 60 days with the business being you going through the transition into the business, and we will encourage another workshop, similar kind, but this time the purpose of that workshop will be to turn attention to more longer term strategic visioning and planning kinds of issues. Classic example is if a company is predominantly commercial in what they offer, maybe there's an opportunity to talk about going over to the residential side or vice versa. So that's a key strategy shift to be explored and talked about. And at that second workshop, we can delve into those possibilities. And basically, it sets the stage for the longer term growth of the business. But you put those two together, and let's say even on the high side of the time gap, so 60 days post closing is the first workshop, another 60 days is the second workshop. Now you're 4 months in on the post-close ACE engagement. You'll only have about 30 days left with your lead or your whole integration team. And we use that to kind of button up and mop up any other details that we haven't already covered. So part of what happens, your lead integrator comes with a project plan that we have built over time. We have identified, I think the last count was about 137 task items on the project plan that affect a good, healthy transition of a business. Each of the integrators has their own segment on that project plan to work with you on. You'll get the chance to meet with the integrators separately and individually over time. Often our clients AEs will choose to meet with the lead integrator every week during the transition. Those meetings are done virtually, but the closing date, the first workshop and the second workshop, the lead integrator is on site with you. That's not a virtual, that is an in-person event. So again, I think I'll pause for a moment and see if that is everybody tracking with me so far. You follow what we're saying, what makes up the ACE program?
Uh, yeah, Doug, I track with you. I do have one follow-up question.
Sure.
Um, what happens if um, no internal existing employees have been identified as being having the capabilities to run said business, and you have to actually go out and recruit? How does that line up with the ACE timeline of 6 months post-close?
We have had situations where we have actually worked with the AE to go out to the market and recruit a general manager or a lead technician or an office manager or a people and culture leader. We've actually, been involved with going to market and trying to identify those people to come in and make up that leadership team. Because if the team you're inheriting has none of that leadership capacity or potential within them, that actually, in my humble opinion, is a little bit of a red flag that should have been uncovered in due diligence and maybe not even gotten all the way to closing. Um, a company that is that thin and that heavily centered on the owner's influence is going to be a bigger challenge to transition, because unless you are bringing that exact technical skill and ability with you, which most of you will not have, and that's not a knock, it's just a statement, somebody on that team needs to provide that expertise. And in your due diligence, as you're looking at personnel rosters, and we have a template that you should have seen in some of the material. We call it the skills matrix. It's kind of an inventory of who all the people are, what their level of expertise may be, what their tenure is, what their level of performance in that task. Um, we encourage people to heavily evaluate that, because you've got to eliminate key man risk. If, for instance, and this is where a lot of the trade companies get very tricky about acquiring, if the locale there, the place where you're operating requires an ownership interest to hold the license for the trade, that becomes a really big issue there. Licensing can be a big issue. If you're in a jurisdiction that doesn't have quite so strict a licensing, they still have a license requirement, but it's not quite so strict. Your first key man risk question is, who holds the license and what can I arrange to keep them engaged in the business so that I meet my statutory requirement for licensing to operate. So those are all kind of really important key man risk issues. Occasionally, and here lately, we've had a couple of deals where there is a family member in the business that is intending to stay with the business after the owner departs. Sometimes it's a son or a daughter, sometimes it's an in-law. Um, Often people ask me the question, is that going to be a problem for me? And my honest answer is, it depends. It depends on the personality. It depends on the character of the individuals. We've got one that's pending LOI right now where the son is going to stay in the business, but the owner has said, or I'm sorry, son-in-law, but the owner has said son-in-law has no desire to take on the pain and burden of ownership. He's happy doing his work. He loves the work. He likes what he's doing. He's good at it. He's committed. If that's all true, I wouldn't have an objection to that. It would be a matter of the owner, the new owner, talking to that gentleman and working out their own relationship and how everything can go forward. And, you can speculate on familial ties, after the owner's gone and the son-in-law shows up for Christmas or Thanksgiving and they start talking about the business. Sure, that's going to happen. But if you've got your own positive relationship with that person, hopefully what comes out of those things will be favorable. So there's all manner of complexity that goes with that, but it is something to consider. But anyway, that's a lot, Ben. I'll get back to the basic question. What if you don't have somebody on the roster that could fill one of those roles? Clearly, again, I'll restate, I think that's a problem and potentially an actual red flag in the due diligence. And not to say you can't overcome that, but you will have to see opportunity in your numbers to think about the need to go hire some of that talent to carry it forward. So if your EBITDA and SDE are already a little tight, you may not have the capacity to go hire a general manager or a people and culture person or both. That accentuates the notion that could be a red flag about how thinly staffed and organized that business may be.
Got it. And would a solution of keeping on owner until said transition happens be a mitigating factor, or it would still present as much as just an inherent risk if the skills are absent?
It's definitely a mitigating factor to have them on the hook for staying on. The majority of our deals of late, the transition services agreement with the seller typically says 3 months full-time, 3 months part-time, and then 3 months on call after that. That's kind of the common structure. Now, we've had deals where they say 6 months full-time, 3 months part-time, yada, yada. That's ultimately your call on how long it's going to take to make that transition and what areas of the business are being impacted by that owner's involvement. That's the real question. And in our ACE material, by the way, I didn't mention, for ACE, we have yet another library of online training modules to go through that you would be given access to when you sign up for ACE. And in that material, we talk about the notion of owner succession. And what we mean by that is basically going through a process to get as much of a download from that owner about what they did day by day, every day, so that you are not surprised by anything. And that should be the first priority in whatever full-time involvement the seller may have with your business after closing. It's a matter of you and them kind of being joined at the hip for that period. Talk about every transaction, every opportunity, every moment that does come up, and get their insight or their institutional knowledge downloaded as fast as possible. And if you don't do anything else in the transition with the seller, that's the one thing that needs to be focused on, is trying to get as much of their knowledge downloaded. We have an AE, I think he's on the call. Yeah, Casey over in Albuquerque. Casey Gerke is in the final stages of closing on his deal. And he and his seller have already worked out an arrangement that for roughly the first 2 weeks, by the way, this is a landscaping company in Albuquerque. They've worked out a deal where Casey is going to be driving in the truck with the seller, going out to job sites every day for the first 2 weeks, primarily to meet the team, but also to understand the stages of the jobs, the input and the oversight that the owner seller controls. Talking about the work, talking about the jobs, talking about the customers, suppliers, etc. So a very much hands-on, on-the-job training kind of exercise, which I think's brilliant. I think it's a great play. When you're in a business like that, there's really not much going on at the home office, to be honest. I mean, yes, there's new customer lead processing and bidding and estimating going on, but not really much else beyond that. So being out in the field with the workers, with the jobs, with the team is going to be a powerful move. So smart play there, Casey.
Got it. Thanks, Doug.
Any other questions? Okay, well, that's kind of it in a nutshell. And typically, what we do, if you may be interested, and by the way, I just want to be clear, this is in no way required. It's a strategy for you to consider and entertain if you so choose. We have a team of subject matter experts, leaders in the business that have done this before and have had great success with acquisitions and transitions. They are all manner of experts in finance or people in culture and other things. And with the availability on ACE, it's just a whole sort of backup team to help you through that transition. And if nothing else, it gives you that kind of assurance that you're not going it alone. You know, you walk in there on day one, otherwise all by yourself, and it's kind of like, oh my God, what have I got myself into now? And we're there to, give you that boost of confidence and support as you go through that. Not saying that any of you couldn't do it on your own. I'm confident you can, but it is a bonus situation to help ensure that there's a strategy and a plan for that success. Okay. Well, I know we're not totally burned up the hour. I'm happy to give everybody time back unless there's any other question, and even unrelated to ACE. If you've thought of something else that's come up since we started talking, I'm happy to answer those questions.
I would add a couple comments if that's all right.
Sure.
Doug was just talking about me. I'm Casey. I'm getting close to finalizing acquisition of a landscaping company. And I'll just say that the seller is getting a lot of reassurance out of me using the ACE program. I mean, he keeps saying he's never sold a business. I've never bought a business. I've never run a business. So to have a team of experts come in and help us with some of the things we're questioning how we're going to do, he's probably more appreciative of it than I am. So I just think that's really interesting. Like at first I was kind of trying to sell him on like, here's Acquira, this is what they do and they're good at it. And now he's like, he was pressuring me. He's like, are you going to do that program? Like you should sign up.
Yeah.
So Casey, you would say, in your opinion, that it is a good sign if the seller agrees to stay on and is amenable to the ACE program to help and guide and integrate.
Yeah. I would also say too that I think it's pretty common for most of the businesses that we are looking at. Like he is an older gentleman, he just turned 70 and he's not fully on board with everything, or he's got his ways of doing things, but you're going to get all kinds of different people in like positions on the scale as far as that goes. I mean, he's a great business owner. He doesn't really want to change a lot of what he's done, but he's really happy to know that somebody that has done this a lot is here to support us. And I had him get on one of our weekly ACE calls with Doug, and so he got to see who Doug was and know that this advice isn't coming from some strange person. It's Doug. He's got a beautiful background, great voice.
Well, I might not be out of the realm of strange, but that's okay. I get it, what you're saying. Thank you. I will add, for what it's worth, and again, this is going to sound a little bit self-aggrandizing, but Alan at First Internet Bank has on multiple occasions spoken publicly that if an AE comes to them to bank their deal, if they are committed to using ACE, there's kind of a couple of extra plus marks that go in the file that help the underwriting. The chief credit people at FIB have embraced what we're doing with ACE, and they've seen the results that we've been able to accomplish for other people. And they like the deal a lot better if they know the AE is committed to using ACE. And also, similarly, if you have a need or are going to be talking to Chris Mooney at the fund about additional capital injection, he requires the use of ACE. It's a non-negotiable for Chris's deal structures. That's been his pledge to his investors that are part of the fund. And it will become a requirement if you're going to use the capital fund. So, okay. Anything else from anyone? All right. Well, with that, thanks everyone for sitting in. I hope this was helpful. And if you do have a question and get down the road, want to talk, always feel free to drop me a line either through Slack or on the email. I'll be happy to hook up with you. We can talk further about your situation and your concerns or ideas. And other than that, we'll see you on the next one. Everybody have a great weekend.